Oi, oi. All right. How's it going? I'm Grant. You're you. This is the Doodle Review today. It's another edition of Soundbites, aka it's like a catch-up episode collecting reviews of a bunch of albums that I've kind of not got the chance to talk about over the last few months. I'm calling today's episode the Jazz Cafe because it's a bunch of albums in the kind of jazz and ambient genre that I've heard this year, but just haven't had the time to do a deep dive on. Before we get into it, I just want to point out the kind of vulgarity of rating music like this. In this series, the rating system is bad, mid, decent, great, next level. But I just want you to know that the notion of labeling music in this way, music of such deep artistic creativity and feeling, I kind of don't really agree with it myself. I mean, when you look at it in the big picture, it doesn't make sense to rate any art. But for some reason, music with an objective to sell, i.e., most of the music that we kind of review on this channel, feels like fair game, especially if the artist in question, are worth a few bob. It feels different in the jazz and avant-garde category because this music, while I'm sure its release is intended to support the artist, and I certainly hope that it does, its financial potential is clearly not the reason that it's made. So before we go into this, I want to acknowledge, as I say, the vulgarity of rating the music in this way. And I guess I just want to caveat that I hugely respect the artist involved, and any lot I label as mid or bad, take that more as a rating of my appreciation of the music rather than the quality of the music itself. Does that make it better? I don't know. Anyway, let's just crack on. If I'm honest, I have no idea what drew me to this Total Blue record. Very occasionally, I'll hit up Pitchfork's Friday summary of albums like dropping that day, and to just keep me on my toes, I'll pick one based on the artwork. And this blue rendering of what looks like the kind of Easter Island big heads piqued my interest, so I chucked it in the library. Total Blue is an ambient jazz electronic collaboration between multi-instrumentalist, producer and DJ Nikki Benedek, electronic artist Alex Talon, and Anthony Calonico. If I had to give you my honest reaction, it kind of reminds me of what would happen if someone made like a full album of the late 80s score of action movies. I particularly recall Lethal Weapon 2's combination of marimba, fretless bass, and saxophone. And to be honest, if I needed to describe this album super quickly, that's probably quite an accurate description. This album does end with a track that borders on funky house, but yeah, overall it's the ambience of 80s action movies that it kind of sets the tone for, and someone's clearly put it together with the care that maybe this genre has finally been looking for. I enjoyed this more than my description of it would have you believe. I'd say this one's decent. Ndu Mukhtar is a Tuareg singer-songwriter and absolute guitar shredder. I've seen a few comparisons in the press in the past to Hendrix, which I think is fair from a Western music perspective, but a more accurate comparison would be to Malayan guitar giant Ali Farka Touré. You can definitely feel lineage in their work in between the rhythms and guitar phrasings, but where Mukhtar goes further, particularly on the last record, Afrique Victime, is by bringing more energy and a crunchy, distorted edge to the proceedings. Funeral for Justice is Mukhtar's seventh album, third on indie label Matador, and third with a full band behind him. Mukhtar's work has always been political, highlighting the injustices that have been brought upon the continent of Africa as a whole, and particularly his native Niger. But Funeral for Justice feels more explicit and powerful than I'd heard on the last album. I don't speak French or Tamashek, so I can't actually get this from the majority of the lyrics here, but you can just feel it. There's anger here and there's sorrow, and it feels directed with purpose. The translated lyrics that I did come across for Funeral for Justice, the song, confirms that. The words furiously asking African leaders why they sell out their nations to Western interests. The music delivers Mukhtar's message with real power, and it rocks hard. The title track opens the album with these banging chords and riffs before going into a more flowing beat, and follow-up Imua starts with this very mellow blues rock beat but builds to these wild, furious solos. The slower pieces are equally as captivating, with the closer Modern Slaves one of my favorites here. It just has a beautiful chord progression, and the quieter dynamic gives more room for the song to breathe. And that could be my only criticism, that sometimes across this album the band are just going so hard on these spidery West African riffs through the body of the album that the potency sometimes of those tracks gets lost, and they feel a little bit all too similar. But overall, I have to say this one is great, and it does get better the more you listen to it. Okay, so this is a collaboration between the very famous surrealist director David Lynch. You know, you might remember him from Mulholland Drive and Twin Peaks. It's a collaboration between him and his longtime muse in the kind of music world, singer Christabel. And apparently, this record was inspired by Lynch kind of taking a midnight walk through a forest where looking up at the kind of tree line and the clouds and the moon, he apparently, like a vision, like a dream, could kind of hear Christabel's voice over the top of it, and it inspired him to make this record. And I guess you would definitely describe it as ambient. You know, it's very calming, very kind of long, drawn out songs. There are some nice guitar sounds at certain points. There's a track called Know the Rest, which in particular I kind of like. But honestly, the rest of this album, it just sounds like a lot of breathy, long, drawn out vocals. It's not a bad sound by any means. It's quite, pleasant. But it just nothing would really engage me with it. I listen like I do with all records at least 5 times all the way through. And yeah, I do like ambient music. I do like jazz music. I do like experimental, but I like to feel that there's differentiation from track to track. Like I want there to be something to engage with, and sometimes that engagement can be, you know, almost nothing. Like I'm engaging with a specific sound or tone or texture. But on here, it's just everything was so much of a muchness, aside from, like moments of odd guitar parts that I quite like, that I just didn't find anything to grab onto. So I'm gonna rate this one as bad in terms of my enjoyment of it. I can already see the meme of David Lynch literally telling me to go fuck myself, which is totally valid. Totally valid. The man's a creative genius. Obviously, listen for yourself, take your own judgments. This one just wasn't for me. Hey, so this is only Ty Segall's second record this year after the more conventional, for him, Three Bells that came out like February, March time. And what he's put out here is kind of a free jazz drums only record. It explores themes of love through drum, yes, but also percussive melodic instruments like timpani and marimba and things like that. It's really out there, but I kind of love it. It really reminds me of, or what it makes me feel when I listen to it is like, for a long time before I would seek this sort of music out, I would occasionally take chances at the record store and just pick something out, either because the artwork looked cool or I'd heard something about the artist, and that might end up pulling you into some sort of category like this. And you do that, and sometimes you find stuff that really isn't your thing, and occasionally you find something just that feels kind of magical. And this record really feels like that to me. I can so imagine someone at some point in time stumbling upon this with its very abstract cover, thinking, yeah, you know what, I've heard of Ty Segall, I'll give it a go. And then it becomes just one of those obscure records that ends up being, yeah, beautiful. There's 4 long form tracks here. My favorite is probably the closing track, Love Rudiments. I think it's probably the most easy to grasp because it has, if I recall correctly, the very steady kind of metallic like tones that's almost played like a riff, and then the rest of the track builds over it. So maybe I like it more because it just is the most kind of conventional, but I do enjoy everything here. That particular track has like a really hypnotic krautrock vibe to it. And there's also like these ascending and descending kind of percussive melodies throughout that play against the drums in different stereo channels. So I'm going to say this one's great. Okay, so this is a collaborative album between Sam Wilkes on bass, Craig Weinrib on drums, and Dylan Day on guitar. Sam Wilkes, you might recall, I have covered him a couple of times on the channel, most recently with the album The Duba. There's a classic story behind how this album came together. It was apparently captured in one night, 4 magical hours of just these 3 people coming together and putting everything down on wax or on tape, or let's face it, probably Pro Tools. But yeah, most of the magic here was captured in one evening, and then they went back to it I think the thing that stood out to me more so than any other Sam Wilkes project that I've listened to before is that there's a slide guitar here uh, by Dylan Day, and that gives everything this kind of very chill, almost country lilt to what is effectively, more of a, I don't know whether you'd class it as free jazz, but it's certainly more in that jazz realm. I also love there's a lot of ad libs here that kind of come from this thing of playing live. So you've got that slide guitar from Dylan Day. You've got Sam Wilkes just, vibing with the bass, and then Weinrib on the drums. And then every now and again, you'll hit someone be like, "Yep, get it," and then like they pick up into a new segment. I'm always fond of that when you just hear musicians in sync. On one hand, this avoids a lot of my complaints that I did have with the Duba. If you watch my review on that, which is that that album seems so focused on just fucking with the audience or just being weird, taking very, very cool, nice to listen to tracks and then just by the end of it pushing it into dissonance, which makes it more of a challenge than an enjoyment by the end of each track. So this avoids that. Everything is very chill, very casual. It's a pleasure to listen to. On the other hand, you know, when I think of jazz, I do think more of like smooth, cool jazz rather than what you're kind of getting here, which has that kind of country lilt to it. So it's not necessarily playing in my favorite mode, but to be honest, even then, I can't really deny it. I think it's still a pretty great album. I'm gonna say this is great. I only discovered Dave Harrington this year with his record Speak Moment, and he's already back with another. If you don't know, Harrington is a jazz and avant-garde guitar player. He's one half of the act called Dark Side with Nicholas Jarre, and I think they're actually announcing a comeback pretty soon, which is quite exciting. This album is much more direct and groove based than Speak Moment, where I first discovered Harrington. Speak Moment is ambient. It includes, I'm going to be frustrated because I can't remember everyone, but Patrick Shiroishi, among others. And they cast together this just very like long drawn out tapestry of noise. And if I remember rightly, they're using like a specific kind of drum modeling program that allows them to create these really interesting percussive textures that almost weave a tapestry of sound rather than being purely rhythmic. And then, Harrington and Shiroishi are kind of playing off that. Very cool, very cool. But it is very kind of abstract and out there. This Skull Dream is just much more direct. It's much more groove based. Acid Western, I think, is one of my standouts. It's just amazing. Just an amazing quality. It's kind of got this like cinematic quality to it, but also darkness and great grooves. And then it kind of really picks up with these horns by the end. There's another track called Vista Vision, which works in these kind of flangey, almost 80s phased guitar sounds, but in a really cool way. I think I'm going to be talking a bit more about this record because it could well be up there as my jazz record of the year. I'm giving this a next level. It's really good. Okay, so this album, A New Day, I've been referring to it as a James Brandon Lewis album because that's how I discovered it. James Brandon Lewis is a horn and sax player, and I found him through the collaborative record he did this year with the Mesthetics. Now that is a cool record. The Mesthetics have a cool story. They are like the rhythm section of Fugazi, who've decided to go out into kind of like a jazz realm, and then they brought James Brandon Lewis on, and in that album they combined kind of like smooth jazz components with like riffier rocky parts, but not in a lame way. What I've described just sounds lame as fuck, but that album is great. So going into this, I was drawn into it because I remember the riffs and the style and the feel of James Brandon Lewis on the sax on that record. So I figured this might have the same sort of similar swing and groove. But in fact, this is actually not a James Brandon Lewis album. He plays on it. He's one of the key collaborators, but it's actually led by Giovanni Guidi, He's a pianist, jazz pianist, Italian. And it's him, Thomas Morgan on bass, and João Lobo on drums, with James Brandon Lewis providing sax. Now, it's because it's led by Giovanni. It's much more kind of piano driven and very atmospheric and dreamlike. It reminds me a lot of a VJ Aya record that I've reviewed earlier this year. The only thing is that this one just feels a lot more meandering and open, and doesn't necessarily coalesce around grooves as much as that VJ Aya album did. And so, as much as there's fantastic playing throughout, exceptional feel, especially on the part of João Lobo, I just feel this one like washed over me more than it engaged me most of the time. And I appreciate sometimes that is the point. But again, kind of how I felt about that David Lynch one, it just wasn't really grabbing me. So I'm going to say this one's mid, with again the highest respect to everyone that took part and played on this record. Okay, so the Fubutsushi project is Chris Jussel, Chaz Primek, Matthew Sage, and Patrick Shua-Ishii, who I've reviewed or listened to a bunch this year because he just will not stop collaborating with people, and it's incredible. But this quartet, through the pandemic, I can't remember if it was 2020 or 2021, or maybe it started in 2020 and went through to 21. But they, through the pandemic, they basically released albums on a seasonal basis. One of those four records, Setsubun, I loved so much. It was, I think, came as my number 10 album in my top 50 of 2021. This group, they just combine ambient jazz and field recordings so well. It's just always so beautiful to listen to. And yeah, we've spoken about a few, more ambient records in this one that maybe do exactly what they're supposed to do but don't engage me. But for whatever reason, whatever these guys decide to do, it is, can't argue that it's not ambient, but it just captures me, takes me away somewhere else. And I thought this project had come to an end with the pandemic, which I was, obviously happy that the pandemic had come to an end, less excited that I wouldn't hear any more from these. But they came through this year with, instead of what those records were, which was like 20-minute, half an hour little projects, this year it's like a hour-long opus called Meridians. Now, Blue Rose is the opener, and it immediately takes me back to those times during the pandemic in a good way, in those times where I was just really listening to these records to relax. And it almost, that particular song has another weird a layer of nostalgia to me, because there's a sax part or passage or segue or riff that reminds me of the Groove Armada track, the one that samples, maybe it samples the Carpenters. It's that one that, like, if you're fond of sand dunes and salty air, there's a sax in there that's like wah, 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 wah. Yeah, sorry. But there's part of this that recalls that moment. So that song plays a very special, has a place in my heart as well. So it's just a lovely combination of things. And then there's another track later on. I think this longer form album provides this quartet with opportunities to do different things. So there's a track called Spent for Life, which has this very intense kind of synth vibe to it, and it has this kind of like riff at the beginning that allows the group to really center around this kind of recurring thing. And like I say, it's got this darkness to it. It feels a little bit more song structured. So it's nice to hear the group that can do the ambient thing so well quite naturally come to this other form of song or composition here. I really like that. It's probably one of my highlights. There is a vocal track here called Hamilton. And yeah, if you follow any of my Sunday Jazz Club reviews, you'll know that I'm not really a fan of like vocal jazz stuff. So, whatever. I mean, it's still executed as well as it can be for this type of music. And these guys are the best people to do it. Just won't be one of my favorite tracks. But again, aside from that, this is actually up there again with probably one of my favorite jazz ambient sort of records. It's also getting a next level. Okay, so here we are with the Dirty 3 album. I've long been meaning to check out this project from that Warren Ellis, who plays with Nick Cave and part of the Bad Seeds for like 20 years now. I've known that he's been in this band, this other project. I've just never checked it out. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know if this is representative of all of their stuff. There's trademark fiddle that comes in straight away on the first track that honestly, I really respect Warren Ellis as a auteur of sound and what he brings to the Bad Seed project, but like the fiddle part of what he does, which I don't know, could be his main thing, is probably my least favorite thing that he does. Um, Overall, this album feels very freeform, very expressive. I don't know whether I was ready for it, to be honest with you. It's unquestionably beautiful. It just, again, not doing too much to grab my attention in certain parts. The exception to this is track two. I just love the melody. It's got this just, I don't know, it's just beautiful, beautiful melody at the heart of it, which I feel is just totally heart wrenching and beautiful. And I really love that track. And yeah, I don't know. I think I maybe need to spend more time with this, or maybe more time with the Dirty Three to kind of understand their whole approach. Because the record, apart from that track that I just mentioned, just kind of comes and goes and doesn't really linger for me. And again, I feel like I've said that a few times on this, but just not finding the kind of my way into this record. I'm going to say it's mid. Okay, so this is a new album from Andrew Bird. He's cranking them out. He's another very prolific artist. There's definitely one thing I've discovered with artists that are in the jazz category or come up in jazz or feel part of that scene is that that's just once you find an artist, you better hold on tight because you're probably going to get bombarded with, if not one album a year, possibly more. And yeah, I mean, I never know what to expect since becoming a fan of Andrew Bird. It was his song that was included on the soundtrack for the show The Bear. I think it was called Sisyphus that got me into him. And then his most recent records is it Inside Problems. I just love that. And Outside Problems was like a kind of freeform instrumental interpretation of that. This is an album of jazz standards that's just been approached with Andrew Bird's, aesthetic. And I think his thing, if you don't know, is that he's a fiddle player, he's a violin player, first and foremost. So what he's done here is he's managed to like reinterpret a lot of these jazz standards with Alan Hampton on bass and Ted Poor on drums, occasionally vibraphones. But of course, a lot of the standards that he's interpreting here are predominantly originally written for and played on horns or saxes. And what's so cool is that in a lot of places, he's interpreted those sounds on the violin using like his whatever that thing is called that they play it with. That's so bad. I don't know. But dragging that against the strings to kind of make a horn-like sound at certain points and then plucking and then obviously playing. Yeah, it's really, really interesting. And Bird's got such a great voice for that very classic style of crooning alongside jazz standards. But I would say that it's the vocal songs that are my least favorite here. There's a song called Ballon de Peut-être, which is my favorite. It's completely instrumental and it just feels more of a piece with the rest of his work that I kind of gravitate towards. I think I love the idea of this album more than I actually love it. But again, it's one that you can absolutely put on. It's super listenable, and as the title suggests, Sunday morning put on. I couldn't think of a better time to actually put this record on. I'm going to say it's decent. Worth checking out. So let's talk about Khruangbin a la Salah. I know Khruangbin have their thing. It's laid back, it's chilled, it's put on in the background and vibe to music. I get it. But honestly, this record just feels like the most unimaginative thing the group could do. If you like their other albums and want a complete rehash with no surprises, then yeah, this is it and you'll enjoy it. Again, this is one where it's like, am I really about to criticize this album from amazing musicians that sounds beautiful and happy? I think I am. I certainly respect the sounds this group make, and they've got the vibe absolutely nailed, but I don't hear anything on Allah Salah that hasn't already been captured in their previous work. I've seen the group recently kind of pop up on other artists' albums, and I wonder if that's where these guys really should head in the future because they have such a dialed in, almost perfect sound that's just done at this point. It might be more interesting to hear them dip more and more into other artists' worlds and kind of steer them in a different direction. A couple of tunes here that did catch my attention were Pon Pon, which is, unquestionably funky. I do love that hi-hat groove and the ever so subtle wah guitar. The other is the closer Le Petit Gris, which feels genuinely different as like a kind of delicate ambient piece in the mix. I'm going to give this one bad for no other reason than it mostly just feels like a rehash of previous Khruangbin work, and I'd love to hear these incredibly talented players explore more varied sonic territory in the future. All right, that's 11 albums, so it's definitely time to knock it on the head. Obviously, all of this is just what I think. Let me know what you reckon. Tell me what you say and hit me up in the comments and let me know if you've heard any of these. I've also put some links to some other reviews in the description. I weekly, sometimes less than weekly, do a Sunday jazz club where I look at where I look at Sundays? No, where I look at jazz albums. So if this is your kind of vibe, there's plenty more content from there to take a look at as well. Other than that, though, nothing else for me to say, but take care, mate. Mind how you go. Cheers then.